Free to Choose is a book co-authored by Nobel Prize-winning American economist Milton Friedman and his wife, psychologist Rose Friedman. Published in 1962, this book is a classic work on free market economy and individual freedom. First, let's take a look at the main content of the book. Free to Choose is a book that focuses on individual freedom and the market economy. Among other things, Milton Friedman emphasizes that the market economy is a self-regulating mechanism that automatically adjusts the price and supply of products and services to meet the needs of consumers and producers. He believes that the government should minimize intervention in the market, because government intervention usually leads to market failure and undesirable consequences. He also stressed that a free market economy promotes individual freedom and prosperity because it increases competition and innovation, improves productivity and product quality, and encourages people to develop their talents and creativity. On the other hand, Rose Friedman discusses personal freedom and responsibility from the perspective of psychology. She believes that personal freedom and responsibility are inextricably linked, and that only when an individual takes responsibility can he or she truly enjoy the benefits of freedom. She also explores the relationship between freedom and punishment, pointing out that if punishment is too harsh or too mild, it will have a negative impact on individual freedom and social justice. Her essays also explore issues such as education, welfare, and economic equality, offering some new thoughts and perspectives. Free to Choose is a book that focuses on the free market economy and individual liberty, emphasizing the self-regulating power of the market mechanism and the importance of a free economy, while also exploring issues such as individual liberty and responsibility and the relationship between liberty and punishment. This book is written in a relaxed, easy to understand, lively and interesting style, making it easier for readers to understand and accept the ideas and thoughts presented. Even if you do not have a professional background in economics or psychology, you will be able to gain insight and gain from it. The first chapter of Free to Choose, The Invisible Hand, Free Markets and Economic Order, is the opening chapter of the book and the core of the book. In this chapter, author Milton Friedman explains the core meaning of freedom and individual responsibility from the perspective of the free market and economic order. First, Friedman explains the concept of a free market as a market formed by a countless number of individuals in the course of transactions that result in the spontaneous distribution of wealth and goods in the market. He quotes Adam Smith, who said, "It is not out of the goodwill of meat merchants, but out of their self-interest, that we are able to enjoy food, clothing, and shelter." Friedman argues that the free market is a powerful force that promotes economic development and resource allocation and can automatically regulate market prices to achieve the optimal allocation of resources. Then, Friedman talked about the concept of the invisible hand, a concept proposed by Adam Smith, referring to the spontaneous order and coordination in the market. Friedman cited an example to illustrate this concept: when a person buys a commodity in the market, he will have an effect on the market price, and this effect will be transmitted to the whole market, thus affecting the behavior and decisions of others. This influence does not require any central planning or directive, because it is formed by the behavior of numerous people in the market, which is called the invisible hand. Finally, Friedman emphasizes the importance of free markets and individual freedom. He believes that free markets promote individual innovation and competition, and promote the development and progress of society. He believes that the free market can promote individual innovation and competition, and promote the development and progress of society, while personal freedom is the basis for a person to realize his own values and pursue happiness. In general, the first chapter of Free Choice is the core of the book, which explains the core meaning of freedom and individual responsibility from the perspective of free market and economic order. This chapter is important for understanding what follows and the main idea of the book, and is a classic in the disciplines of economics and sociology. The second chapter of Free to Choose, Market and Government, The Game of Freedom and Constraint, examines the role and relationship of markets and government in economic activity. In this chapter, author Milton Friedman attempts to answer an important question: which is better for economic development and social welfare, the market or government? First, Friedman emphasizes the advantages of the market, which he believes automatically regulates prices and resource allocation to achieve the optimal allocation of resources. Free competition in the market can also promote innovation and progress, promoting economic development and social progress. He also mentioned the limitations of government, which often has administrative costs and efficiency problems, and government decisions are often influenced by political and interest factors, and may not be able to maximize economic development and social welfare. However, Friedman also recognizes that markets are not perfect, and that they have failures and limitations, such as market monopoly, externalities, and underestimation of the public purse. These problems require government intervention and regulation to protect the rights of consumers and environmental sustainability. Government intervention in these issues should be limited and effective, and should take into account the balance of costs and benefits. In this chapter, Friedman also mentions the role and responsibilities of government, whose main responsibility is to protect the public interest and maintain law and order, and to provide services such as infrastructure, public goods, and social security. The role of the government should be limited and a balance between the market and the government should be achieved. Overall, the second chapter of Free to Choose is an exploration of the relationship between markets and government. Friedman argues that markets can play an important role in resource allocation and economic development, and that the role of government should be limited and effective, and that a balance needs to be struck between markets and government. This chapter is important for understanding the relationship between market economy and government intervention, and is a classic in the disciplines of economics and political science. The third chapter of Free to Choose, Individual Choice, Free Will and Social Responsibility, explores the balance between individual freedom and social responsibility. In this chapter, author Milton Friedman argues that individual freedom is the basis for the realization of one's values and the pursuit of happiness, but at the same time, individuals also need to assume social responsibility and obey the law. First, Friedman emphasizes the importance of personal freedom, which he believes is the basis for a person to realize his or her values and pursue happiness. Everyone should have the right to freely pursue their own goals and dreams, and the government and society should guarantee this freedom. He also mentions the concept of free will, that is, each person has the freedom to determine his own behavior and choices, and this free will is the basis of human progress and development. However, Friedman also pointed out that individual freedom is not absolute, and that individuals also need to take social responsibility and obey the law. He believes that individual freedom should be limited by law and moral standards, such as not hurting others, violating the rights of others and violating public order. In addition, individuals need to assume social responsibility, such as responsibility to their families, communities, and nations. In this chapter, Friedman also mentions the role of government and society in balancing individual freedom and social responsibility. The government and society should protect individual freedom as much as possible, but also need to protect the public interest and maintain social order under the premise of limiting individual freedom and forcing individuals to assume social responsibility. The role of government and society should be limited and effective, and a balance needs to be struck between individual liberty and social responsibility. Overall, Chapter 3 of Free Choice is an exploration of the balance between individual liberty and social responsibility. Friedman argues that individual liberty is the basis for the realization of one's values and the pursuit of happiness, but at the same time, individuals need to assume social responsibility and obey the law. The role of government and society should be limited and effective, and a balance needs to be struck between individual freedom and social responsibility. This chapter is important for understanding the balance between individual liberty and social responsibility, and is a classic in political science and ethics. Chapter 4 of Free to Choose, The Role of Government, Protection or Intervention, examines the roles and responsibilities of government in economic activity. In this chapter, author Milton Friedman attempts to answer an important question: what role should government play, whether to protect the market or to intervene? First, Friedman emphasizes the advantages of markets in resource allocation and economic development, arguing that markets can automatically regulate prices and resource allocation to achieve the optimal allocation of resources. Free competition in the market can also promote innovation and progress, and promote economic development and social progress. Therefore, the role of the government should be to protect the market, to ensure free competition in the market, and to maintain market order and law enforcement. However, Friedman acknowledges that markets are not perfect, and that there are failures and limitations, such as market monopoly, externalities, and undervaluation of the public purse. These problems require government intervention and regulation to protect the rights of consumers and environmental sustainability. However, government intervention should be limited and effective, and should not interfere too much with the market to avoid damage to the market. In this chapter, Friedman also mentioned the role and responsibilities of the government. The government's main responsibility is to protect the public interest and maintain law and order, and the need to provide services such as infrastructure, public goods, and social security. The role of the government should be limited and needs to protect the free competition of the market and maintain the market order as much as possible. Government intervention should be effective and take place in the context of market failures and constraints. Overall, Chapter 4 of Free Choice is an exploration of the role and responsibilities of government in economic activity. Friedman argues that the primary responsibility of government is to protect the public interest and maintain law and order, and to provide services such as infrastructure, public goods, and social security. The government's role should be limited and needs to protect the free competition of the market and maintain the market order as much as possible. Government intervention should be effective and should take place in the context of market failures and constraints. This chapter is important for understanding the role and responsibilities of government in the economy and is a classic in the disciplines of economics and political science. Chapter 5 of Free to Choose, Intervening in the Market, Dilemmas and Options, examines the challenges and dilemmas of government intervention in the marketplace. In this chapter, author Milton Friedman argues that government intervention in the marketplace often faces dilemmas and challenges that require careful consideration of the effects and costs of intervention. First, Friedman points out that the main reasons for government intervention in markets are market failures and constraints. Market failures and constraints can lead to resource inequality and economic inefficiency, so the government needs to intervene and adjust. However, the effects and costs of government intervention need to be carefully considered. Government intervention may lead to industry distortions, economic inefficiencies, and price increases, which may be detrimental to consumers and the economy. Second, Friedman raises four main questions about government intervention. The first question is who decides on government intervention, and who should decide on government intervention, the government itself or the market and the public. The second question is the scope and extent of government intervention. Should government intervention be limited or unrestricted? The third question is the way and means of government intervention. Should government intervention be direct or indirect? The fourth question is the cost and benefit of government intervention. Should government intervention be the most or least cost-effective? Finally, Friedman presents a comparison between the market and the government. He believes that the market can automatically adjust prices and resource allocation to achieve the optimal allocation of resources, and that free competition in the market can also promote innovation and progress, and promote economic development and social progress. Government intervention can address market failures and constraints, but government intervention often faces dilemmas and challenges and requires careful consideration of the effects and costs of intervention. Overall, Chapter 5 of Free to Choose examines the dilemmas and challenges of government intervention in the marketplace. Friedman argues that government intervention in the marketplace requires careful consideration of the effects and costs of intervention and that four major problems with government intervention need to be addressed. This chapter is important for understanding the challenges and dilemmas of government intervention in the marketplace and is a classic in economics and political science. Chapter 6 of Free to Choose, Imperfect Markets, Information Asymmetries and Externalities, examines two other major causes of market failure, namely, information asymmetries and externalities. In this chapter, author Milton Friedman details the effects of information asymmetries and externalities on markets and the corresponding solutions. First, Friedman explains the impact of information asymmetry on markets. Information asymmetry refers to the fact that some people in a market have more or less information than others, which can lead to distortions in market prices and resource allocation. For example, a seller may have more information than a buyer, resulting in a loss to the buyer in the transaction. Ways to address information asymmetry include strengthening legal requirements, improving transparency, and enhancing consumer education. Second, Friedman describes the impact of externalities on the market. An externality is a non-market cost or benefit to others that results from the actions of some people in a market. For example, the emission of pollutants from a factory may cause damage to the health of the surrounding population, which is a negative externality. Ways to address externalities include taxation, setting environmental standards, and providing incentives. Finally, Friedman emphasizes the role of government in addressing information asymmetries and externalities. The government can address information asymmetries by strengthening legal requirements, increasing transparency, and enhancing consumer education, and it can also address externalities by imposing taxes, setting environmental standards, and providing incentives. However, government intervention also needs to be cost-effective and avoid unnecessary disruptions and distortions to the market. Overall, the sixth chapter of Free Choice is an exploration of the other two main causes of market failure, namely information asymmetry and externalities, and Friedman emphasizes the role of government in solving information asymmetry and externality problems, while also proposing corresponding methods and measures to solve the problems. This chapter is very important to understand the causes and solutions of market failure, and it is also a classic work in economics and political science. The seventh chapter of Free Choice, Education and Freedom, Equality and Excellence, explores the importance of education to society and the individual and the related issues of educational policy. In this chapter, author Milton Friedman offers his views on education and corresponding policy recommendations. First, Friedman argues that education is a very important social mechanism that helps people acquire knowledge and skills, improve their quality of life, and realize their personal aspirations and social prosperity. He believes that education should be a process of free choice, that everyone should have equal access to education, and that they should be free enough to choose their own education method. He opposed excessive government intervention and control of education, which he believed would deprive people of free choice and destroy the efficiency and quality of education. Secondly, Friedman put forward his educational policy proposals. He advocates the implementation of an education voucher system, in which the government gives a certain amount of education funds directly to parents to allow them to freely choose their children's schools, which will increase parental choice and school competitiveness, thus improving the quality and efficiency of education. In addition, he believes that the government should encourage private capital to enter the education field to improve the quality and efficiency of education, and should encourage innovation and diversity in education to meet the needs and interests of different people. Finally, Friedman explained the two goals of education, equality and excellence. In his view, the government should pursue equality in education, meaning that everyone should have equal access to education, but not at the expense of quality and efficiency. At the same time, the government should also pursue excellence in education, that is, to improve the quality and efficiency of education so that everyone can receive the best education possible. In summary, Chapter 7 of Free to Choose is an exploration of the importance of education and policy recommendations. Friedman argues that education should be a process of free choice and that government intervention and control should be reduced as much as possible, and makes policy recommendations such as an education voucher system and encouraging private capital to enter the field of education. He argues that the government should pursue equality and excellence in education, both to ensure equal opportunity for everyone and to improve the quality and efficiency of education. This chapter is an important reference for understanding the importance of education and achieving equality and excellence in education. Chapter 8 of Free to Choose, Welfare Programs, The Poverty Reduction or Poverty Trap, is an examination of social welfare programs. In this chapter, author Milton Friedman examines the role and limitations of social welfare programs and how reforms can address the problems of welfare programs. First, Friedman argues that welfare programs are an important social mechanism that can help the poor obtain what they need to live and improve their quality of life. However, he points out that welfare programs have their limitations and can lead to a poverty trap in which some people rely on welfare programs instead of seeking work and improving their skills, thus perpetuating poverty. Second, Friedman offers his proposal for reform of social welfare programs. He advocates a negative income tax system, in which the government provides direct financial subsidies to low-income families rather than through welfare programs. This would provide incentives for people to find jobs and improve their skills in order to escape poverty, and reduce the abuse and waste of welfare programs. Finally, Friedman points out other problems with welfare programs, such as government opacity and inequity, and the complexity and inefficiency of welfare programs. He argues that government intervention and control of welfare programs should be minimized and that market mechanisms should be allowed to work to improve the efficiency and fairness of welfare programs. In summary, Chapter 8 of Free to Choose is an exploration of social welfare programs. Friedman argues that welfare programs are an important social mechanism that can help the poor get what they need, but they also have their limitations and problems. He proposes reforming welfare programs through a system of negative income taxes to motivate people to find work and improve their skills in order to escape from poverty. He also identifies other problems with welfare programs and suggests that government intervention and control of welfare programs should be minimized. This chapter is an important reference for understanding the role and problems of social welfare programs, and for reforming social welfare programs. Chapter 9 of Free Choice, International Trade, Trade Barriers and Global Welfare, is an examination of global trade. In this chapter, author Milton Friedman examines the importance and impact of international trade and the impact of trade barriers on global welfare. First, Friedman argues that international trade is a very important economic activity that can help achieve the best allocation of resources among different countries, thereby improving global welfare. He points out that free trade can promote international division of labor and resource allocation, increase economic efficiency, reduce production costs, and improve consumer welfare. Second, Friedman explores the impact of trade barriers on global welfare. He argues that trade barriers, including tariffs, quotas, technical barriers, and non-tariff barriers, can restrict international trade and thus affect global welfare standards. For example, if a country imposes tariffs on imports, consumers in that country will pay higher prices, and producers can raise prices in the domestic market. This would lead to a less efficient allocation of global resources and lower consumer welfare. Finally, Friedman proposes to lower trade barriers and promote free trade. He advocates promoting free trade by lowering tariffs, eliminating quotas and technical barriers, and reducing non-tariff barriers. He believes that free trade can bring more benefits and improve global welfare. Overall, Chapter 9 of the Free Choice is an exploration of global trade. Friedman argues that free trade can promote the international division of labor and resource allocation, increase economic efficiency, and improve consumer welfare. He points out that trade barriers can restrict international trade, thereby affecting global welfare standards. He makes recommendations for lowering trade barriers and promoting free trade to achieve higher levels of global welfare. This chapter is an important reference for understanding the importance and impact of global trade and how to reduce barriers to trade. Chapter 10 of The Liberal Alternative, The Future of Choice, Liberal and Socialist Choices, examines the two different political systems of liberalism and socialism. In this chapter, author Milton Friedman discusses the fundamentals, advantages and disadvantages, and future choices of liberalism and socialism. First, Friedman explains the basic principles of liberalism and socialism. He argues that liberalism emphasizes the importance of market economy, individual freedom, and private property, while socialism emphasizes the importance of planned economy, public ownership, and social equality. Second, Friedman explores the advantages and disadvantages of liberalism and socialism. He argues that liberalism can bring about higher economic efficiency and individual freedom, but it is also prone to inequality and social division. Socialism can achieve more equal social and public interests, but it often leads to inefficiency in planned economies and abuse of government power. Finally, Friedman proposes a choice between liberalism and socialism in the future. He argues that liberalism and socialism are not absolute opposites, but can be combined to complement each other's development. He advocates that on the basis of market economy, government supervision and regulation should be strengthened to protect the interests of the disadvantaged groups, so as to realize the combination of freedom and equality. Overall, Chapter 10 of The Liberal Alternative is an exploration of the two different political systems of liberalism and socialism. Friedman argues that both liberalism and socialism have their basic principles and advantages and disadvantages, but they also have their limitations and problems. He advocates that on the basis of market economy, government regulation and adjustment should be strengthened to realize the combination of freedom and equality. This chapter is an important reference for understanding the strengths and weaknesses of different political systems and the choices for the future. This book has had a profound impact on modern society and economic theory, and it has also shed some light on our values and ways of thinking. First of all, the book puts forward the view of free market economy, emphasizing the self-regulating ability of market mechanism and the importance of free economy. This perspective has had a profound impact on modern economic theory and practice, influencing government policies and business strategies. It also makes people more aware of the advantages and problems of a market economy and better able to cope with economic globalization and competition. Secondly, the book emphasizes the importance of individual freedom and responsibility, and offers some new thoughts and perspectives. This perspective also has an impact on our values and ways of thinking, making it possible to place greater emphasis on individual freedom and responsibility and to better understand the relationship between freedom and punishment. Finally, the book's impact is also evident in its educational and social implications. The book presents new educational and social concepts that emphasize the importance of individual freedom and responsibility and have an impact on contemporary educational and social development. All in all, Free to Choose is a valuable classic that has had a profound impact on modern society and economic theory through its exploration and reflection on market economy and individual freedom, and has also shed some light on our values and ways of thinking. If you are interested in economics, political science, and sociology, I highly recommend reading this book. I hope that today's introduction will be enlightening, and I thank you for watching.